Hi everyone, my name's Shahnaz and I'm the convener alongside with Joe in this panel. We just want to start out by saying a huge thanks to BISA, Amal and Julia Wellen for getting us to this section, to this stage, and to Eddie, who has been a star with last minute technical issues today. The panel was designed to incorporate the views of our outreach students. We work with amazing students from Link Hall and King Edward School. And the title was originally Vicarious Identity of Muslim Women in the Curriculum. But what's been amazing during this process of working with students is the way they've dealt with the provocation of vicarious identity, and each of them have brought their own interpretation of it, which ended up being a far richer and more interesting series of presentations than we had started with. So we're going to start with Joe today, and then we will be going to Saarah and Lily, and then because we wanted it to be that we were all in it together, it will be myself and then Tonio, and then ending up with Alex and Mia. We hope you enjoy it as much as we have working with them. Thank you. Over to you, Joe.
Excellent. So good morning, everyone. Having a good conference so far. So yeah, Shahnaz has asked me to talk a little bit about vicarious identity and just to provide an overview of the concept and some of the different ways that we sort of think about it. And I don't have a PowerPoint today because I'm actually coming to you from my phone because all my technology packed up yesterday. So that was fun last night. But hopefully I don't need the presentation. Hopefully it'll be okay. So perhaps before turning to think about vicarious identity, we should perhaps start by thinking about what identity is. And I think we can think of identity as a representation of our sense of self through our thoughts, words, and actions. And clearly it forms part of our everyday inner monologue, but it's also how we relate to others around us. Identities are the sum of our values, experiences, our memories, but also our routines and actions that we use to kind of navigate the social world that we live in. So importantly, as the sociologist Anthony Giddens puts it, we are not what we are, but we are what we make of ourselves. And what he means by this is identity is not something fixed and unchanging. It's not something we have so much as something we do. It is a project that we are constantly working on and honing, whether or not we are aware of it. So why do we have identities and what functions do they perform? Well, firstly, identities help us to make sense of who we are as unique human beings. So while they are often comprised of stories about who we are, they are also largely dependent on conveying who we are not and how we are different from others around us. For example, we have to do this when we're applying for jobs, particularly when we tell future employers that we are especially hardworking or creative compared to others. But crucially, in order for this to be believable, our words have to be backed up by actions. This provides the basis for stability and control, the sense that I can live up to my values, but also self-esteem. I feel good about myself because I can do so, and that those values compare well or are recognized by those around me. And linked to this, the stability and worthiness of our identities can also generate social trust. Not only do we believe in ourselves, but others do too. In sum then, self-identity can generate a sense of stability and self-esteem for ourselves and others, and can help to distinguish our place in the world as unique individuals. And collectively, in academic terms, we can refer to this as a sense of ontological security. So having defined what identity is, what do we mean by vicarious identity? Well, in a recent book, Chris Browning, Perti Yeniemi, and Brent Steele argue that a vicarious identity can be seen in those moments when people actually appropriate stories as their own, as if they happen to them, integrating them as part of their own biography, those stories of other people. This is most clearly evident in the use of first-person pronouns to describe what are effectively second-hand experiences. For example, when individuals appropriate their nation's past accomplishments and claim, "We won the Second World War," when they weren't even born at the time. But it can also be seen in family relationships, such as parents living through their children's sporting success. And relatedly, the term vicarious identification describes attempts to establish and legitimize vicarious identity and the forms that these take. In addition to invoking family ties and the use of first-person pronouns, then, there are several complementary strategies for establishing what we call authentic telling rights to a vicarious identity. And these include the articulation of biographical narratives, emphasizing a sense of shared home, culture, community, and history, demonstrations of sufficiently detailed knowledge, but also displays of emotion. And having described these as strategies, it's also important to remember that people are not always consciously aware that they are identifying, nor can they always explain why they feel as they do. So IR scholars have been recently trying to understand how and why people engage in vicarious identification. And my colleagues and I have been particularly interested in how people live vicariously through groups like nation states. Clearly, many people are emotionally invested in how our nation fares, be that on the sports field, an economic or cultural competition, or on the battlefield itself. And we have understood it as supplementing self-identity and ontological security in three ways. Firstly, identifying with the nation state can bolster a subject's sense of personal agency by allowing them to live through the achievements and experiences of the broader community. And this strategy is especially attractive, of course, when subjects perceive their own identities and agency to be lacking in some way. While few of us will ever experience firsthand sporting success on the world stage, then vicariously identifying with national sports teams allows subjects to bask in reflected glory, thereby bolstering their self-esteem, although not so much so for England fans. Secondly, belonging to the social groups provides individuals with an added sense of meaning and significance, as well as the chance to improve their social status. So in addition to cultivating fictive kinship with fellow subjects, belonging also allows members to kind of hierarchically distinguish themselves from other community members through competition for social status. For example, when stans or true fans distinguish themselves by claiming their superior commitment to the band or team. And finally, devotion to the nation is seen as a way of contributing to a political project that will live on long after we have gone. Indeed, scholars have been quite interested in the ways that vicarious identification with the nation can sometimes lead individuals to put nation survival above their own, as illustrated by the example of military sacrifice in wartime. Such sacrifice is often commemorated by ensuring that the names and experiences of the dead live on. So there is also a sense in which our legacy lives on through the nation after we die, and vicarious identity allows us to claim what is known as symbolic immortality. And symbolic immortality, of course, is reliant on the symbiosis of the dead and the living. And this, I think, leads nicely on to the consideration of the politics of vicarious identity, including the ways in which vicarious identity promotion can be used strategically by elite actors for political advantage. For example, governments often encourage people to vicariously identify with leaders at moments of national crisis, but they also call on citizens to engage in acts of collective remembrance that seek to keep alive the memory and legacy of those deemed worthy of remembrance. Of course, precisely who is deemed worthy of remembrance is a deeply political matter. The usual focus is on the war dead and others who are seen as having made particularly significant contributions to the community's survival, self-esteem, and our ability to experience vicarious pride. However, as Brent Steele notes, actions that are a source of pride for some can lead others to, and I quote, feel ashamed of the actions of their in-group, even when they personally were not responsible for those actions, especially when the actions contradict self-identity narratives. And we can see this, of course, in debates about the colonial violence and racialized legacy of the British Empire. Our interdependence on a shared symbolic order renders key figures, events, and symbols in national narratives the focal point for intense anxiety and contestation, which has been clearly observable in culture war debates about removing statues of figures with ties to colonialism and the slave trade. And this can lead to what Maria Maltsu terms mnemonical securitization, whereby actors attempt to establish a singular account of collective memory in order to marginalize alternative readings of figures and events that threaten positive self-concept. And again, I think this can be seen in attempts by the British government ministers recently to pressurize heritage organizations into towing a patriotic line in their depictions of empire. In addition to the vulnerabilities posed by contestation over the content of shared sort of collective vicarious identities, however, certain vicarious identifications also entail a more fundamental risk that gatekeepers will not recognize individuals' claims as legitimate. And this tends to be the case with more specific identities that are associated with particular first-hand experiences. And one of the most high-profile examples discussed by Browning et al. In their book is the American civil rights activist Rachel Dolezal, who was accused of cultural appropriation and of playing blackface when her white parents exposed her born ethnicity. While Dolezal insisted that her vicarious identification as Black was authentic, her behavior was viewed by many as being an especially egregious display of white privilege that appropriated, I quote, highly emotive understandings of the violence and racism characteristic of the experience of the Black Americans over centuries, which it was argued she could not possibly understand. Dolezal's whiteness and the fact that she could effectively opt out of Blackness at any time made proving any commitment to the identity quite difficult. And Dolezal's vicarious identification as a person of color was also viewed by many as effectively debordering the boundaries of identities that had provided a sense of stability to Black Americans and as undermining their telling rights based on lived experiences of racial discrimination, and a limited exclusive social capital conferred by those experiences in testifying to the reality of racism and campaigning for social justice. So the argument effectively was that Dolezal should stay in her lane. Of course, discerning where the boundary lies in such matters is often quite difficult because of the arbitrariness of authenticity. E. Patrick Johnson notes that, like all identities, including personal and national ones, because the concept of Blackness effectively has no essence, Black authenticity is contingent on the historical, social, and political terms of its production and remains deeply contested. Now, this is not to say that there are not good reasons for policing the boundaries of the authentic. After all, as Johnson clarifies, authenticating discourse enables marginalized people to counter oppressive representations of themselves. However, it does remind us that such judgments are social rather than objective ones. And this calls us to reflect, I think, on the normative limits of vicarious identity. Where do the boundaries between identities lie, and where should they lie? In summary, then, vicarious identity involves living through another. People tend to do so because it gives them a sense of augmented agency in the world. It provides them with greater feelings of meaning and significance. It also promises a kind of symbolic immortality. People are often encouraged to identify with the nation, especially through establishing historical ties. But history and how we feel about it is often regarded very differently by different people. While some take pride in their nation's past endeavors, for others, these can be a source of unease and shame. This interdependence makes key historical symbols, figures, and events a site of political struggle. And finally, while vicarious identification with nation states is often encouraged, more specific identities are seen to be protected and to some extent off limits to the extent that they are seen to be attached to particular first-person experiences. So vicarious identity is inherently political and raises ethical questions about the boundaries of identity and when vicarious identity is and is not acceptable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I am going to share my screen and hand it over. I'm really excited for this presentation because this one is going to bring K-pop, Beyonce, and loads of people who I hadn't heard of until this. So I'm going to share my screen now and hope this works. I hope you can all see that. Share screen. Oh, there you go. Share. From beginning, girls, if you could just let me know when you want me to do next slide, please, and when you want me to also play your video. So over to our first student presenters, Lily-Mae and Saarah.
Hi everyone, good morning. I hope you're having a good day. I'm Saarah and our presentation today will kind of be talking about how the music industry, particularly the Grammys, have profited off of people of colour by celebrating their successes, yet not awarding them because of the colour of their skin. And this kind of links in with Vicarious Identity, because the Grammys will nominate POC artists in order to seem more diverse, but when it actually comes to awarding them, they don't get the awards.
Hi, I'm Lily, and when we got given the chance to give this presentation, I struggled to find how I identified with this topic, as I'm a white privileged person. However, I realised it's not so much how I identified, but how I could use this to educate myself upon the topic and use that for the better good. So this presentation will include how we identify with this from two different perspectives.
Shahnaz, can you?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Discussing racism and examples of microaggressions.
How the music industry, particularly the Grammys, have displayed racism towards POC artists such as
BTS.
Nicki Minaj.
The Weeknd. Also, how pop stars inspired their fans to spread awareness of issues.
The final slide will be about how I identify with this and staying in your lane. Next slide, yeah. How we identify this from two different perspectives. I'm not like directly impacted from this, and I don't identify like directly with this. However, the people who surround me are impacted, and that makes this subject even more important to me, because my friends are always impacted with this just because of their colour of their skin. And the music industry, like, we all listen to music, so that music influences a lot of people, so that's how it influences me, and that's sort of like how I identify with it.
I'd say my identification as a British girl who was born here but is ethnically Indian, identify with a lot of confusion around who I am, like, do I belong in this country? Where do I actually belong? Since if I go to India, I'll be considered too British to be there, and if I'm here, I'm too Indian to be here. And also just the lack of representation of people like me in the media, talking about my identity and seeing other people appropriating my identity and thinking of how, like, am I allowed to retaliate against that, or do I have to stay silent? I think this presentation has really opened my mind up to some of the inequalities that I face and how I could overcome it. So next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about racism. As you all know, racism is being treated differently because of your skin color, and it's usually the oppression of a minority group by a majority group. So racism can happen in so many different ways. You could be attacked verbally or physically because of your race or culture, and this can happen online. It can happen in person. It can be tiny little digs at you. It really can happen in a majority amount of ways. Also being told to go back to your country, made to feel like you don't belong somewhere even though you have like legal rights to be there. And also being turned down jobs because of ethnic hairstyles, and the Black community really do face this problem a lot. Yeah, when like another race does the hairstyle, they get praised for it, and it's really upsetting to see how some groups are treated more favorably than others. Next slide, please.
What are racial microaggressions? This can be things like saying phrases such as, "You're pretty for an Indian," "Your hair looks so exotic," and proceeds to touch the hair. "I didn't expect you to speak English so well." If I hear an Indian accent, I put the phone down, it could be a scam call. Or even a shopper following a Black or other ethnic minority for no other reason. Or saying people of your race all look the same, and this is totally wrong.
Next slide, please. Okay, so on the screen is a boy group named BTS. There is a slide next which will sort of introduce them more, but I'm going to speak about this side first. So on the screen, there are a bunch of quotes and stuff about them talking about their experiences of racism as non-English speaking celebrities. Well, they speak, well, some of them speak English, but majority. So they received several comments about their identities and how what they feel like the comments that they got are kind of inconsequential compared to the events that have happened due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Asian hate crime has like gone up like a lot, and many Asian people were being like really like killed, and it was horrible. And they use their platform to speak about it because as Asians who are, I'd say they are quite famous in America, using their platform to raise awareness of what's happening to people of their culture as well, like their ethnicity. It just kind of highlights that these are issues that are happening, so we shouldn't be quiet about them. So next slide, please.
What is vicarious identity? So since this phrase has come up several times in this presentation, let's explain it. Vicarious identity is the appropriation of another's identity, experiences, and actions as if they were one's own. So, for example, when AAVE, African American Vernacular English, is used by non-Black people for comedy, relief, or to sound cooler or more hip, because this is a genuine dialect which Black people have been discriminated for using. And now that is seen as a trend. It's not being seen as a language. It's being seen as Gen Z slang, which isn't okay. And then vicarious identification attempts to establish the legitimization and vicarious identity.
Okay, so on the screen, there's a lot of photos. I'll explain that. At the top, there is a short explanation of who BTS are, if you want to have a read of that. But the slide will be talking about how their successes as the first Korean act to perform and be nominated for the Grammys, sort of was. Yeah. They were used in many promotional ads for the 2021 Grammys since they had a phenomenal audience like any other artist in the world. And it is clear that the Grammys had used their appearance on the show to boost the views, since their views skyrocketed when the BTS members were on the screen, but they actually broke the record for the least amount of viewers when BTS left the screen. So it kind of shows that the Grammys needed their impact to boost the views. And on the screen right now, there's a bunch of statistics about all the categories that their only English-speaking song at the time, which was nominated, which is kind of strange since they had lots of good Korean songs. That song, it did better in 7 categories out of the winning song, which was made by Ariana Grande and Lady Gaga, who are 2 white women. And it kind of brings the question of how was the award sort of calculated and given, since the other song, Dynamite, did not win the award, but it did better in lots of different categories and sold better. So the issue is that they use them as POC artists by not only nominating their only English song, but by using their influence for their own gain and profit to not award them at all, even though they tried better. So next slide, please.
Nicki Minaj and the Grammys. On the screen, there is a small introduction to Nicki Minaj and who she is, in case some of you do not know about her. She is possibly one of the most influential rap artists of this century. However, the Grammys have failed to award her for her successes. She shared it on Twitter that she was bullied into silence for 7 years and that her awards were given to white men instead. This shows that POC identities are being appreciated in society in terms of views and streams, but when it comes to actually awarding them and celebrating their successes, big companies who are white dominated fail to give, which is a huge issue. It's also important to say that not all white artists have an advantage and they over POC artists in the industry, and however, most of the time POC artists do get scrutinised and not given the awards they deserve.
Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm sure some of you might have heard of The Weeknd, and it blew up last summer. And following on from that, he's a singer. I forgot to put the introduction in. But he also highlighted the ridiculously low amount of Black artists that won Album of the Year. As you can see, he said only 10 Black artists over the past 61 years have won Album of the Year. And when you think about how modern day music stems from Black culture, and most of the songs that people listen to today are very heavily influenced by Black culture, it's very strange that a very, very small amount of Black artists have been awarded for their successes. So it's no secret that the majority of music nowadays stems from Black culture. So why are they not being awarded for that? These are questions and conversations that we need to be actively thinking about if we want to understand more about our society. So next slide, please.
Let me try and share the try and find where I put it. Right. Okay, we're just going to have to do it live. Sorry, girls.
We will now try and present a
Sorry, I'll get you to the right second. Let me know when you want me to play it.
We will now present a short video clip of Adele sharing her feelings of Beyonce's album, Lemonade, not securing a Grammy Award, and her embracing and celebration how influential and empowering Lemonade is. You can play it now, Shahnaz.
Thank you.
I think we can't hear it, Shahnaz. I'm not sure if
Oh.
you're playing or not.
Can we? Do I have to?
So, in order to hear the audio, you will need to quit your share screen, then share screen again, and then there'll be a little tick box in the bottom left corner that says share screen with sound.
Share sound. Okay.
Yeah. And then if you share, then we should be able to hear it.
This is why you should never have academics doing the tech. Okay, so Adele again for you all.
Accept this award, and I'm very humbled and I'm very grateful and gracious, but my artist of my life is Beyonce, and this album for me, the Lemonade album, was just so monumental. Beyonce, it was so monumental and so well thought out and so beautiful and soul-bearing, and we all got to see another side to you that you don't always let us see, and we appreciate that. And all us artists here, we fucking adore you. You are our light. And the way that you make me and my friends feel, the way you make my Black friends feel, is empowering, and you make them stand up for themselves. And I love you. I always have, and I always will. Grammys, I appreciate it. The Academy, I love you. My manager, my husband.
Yep, so that was kind of Beyonce Adele talking about how she feels about Beyonce's album Lemonade being really empowering. Okay, so this slide, the aim is to show how we can probably use fan bases to do good deeds, and I've just chosen Army because I had more awareness of this, but I'm aware that other fandoms have done this too. So they've raised an insane amount of money to help other people, like the whole Save Palestine movement, and they've also helped out with sending money for Black Lives Matter, where BTS themselves donated like $1 million, so their fans decided to match that and bring in money to help other people. So it goes to show that fan culture can be used a lot to help other people. So sorry, it can be used to help power a wave of good deeds, which may be used to help people suffering all around the world, whether that be in poverty or against discrimination, so that we can all live in peace and harmony. And I think that we should probably consider, instead of villainizing fan culture, maybe we can start seeing the good things that they do and hopefully try and use their influence to help out on social issues. Next slide, please.
Staying in your lane. This is the idea that you can use your voice. However, you must be able to give it to the people of colour in topics where it affect them the most, for them to use their voice, which is much more important than because it directly impacts them. For me, I use my social media platforms to spread as much awareness as I can. However, when it comes to topics like this, I must pass on the baton to people of colour so they can use their voice and what their opinions on it to actually raise awareness more. And it's important that we do not suppress their voice because it affects them. So that's the idea of like staying in your lane, not using your voice to overpower others.
Thank you for listening to our presentation. That's all.
Thank you guys so much. I am going to do the next presentation, and I'm randomly saying that it's my presentation, but actually it's a presentation which has been done with conjunction with conversations with Muslim students and the panel, who have made it a far better presentation than I think it ever would have been without them. And I'm going to just try and go into the slideshow. So the idea of this presentation is to look at how female Muslim students in the curriculum identify themselves. And it poses two questions, one which spoke to the overall title of the panel, one which asks, how do you establish a sense of identity when you're either not represented or misrepresented by some of the means of establishing vicarious identity? I want to stress here, even though I'm doing the presentation, so much of this has been informed by the Muslim students that we work with and including on the panel, and so thank you so much. So it first begins at looking at how female Muslims in their curriculum develop this sense of ontological security, and how this happens within the curriculum. So we're going to begin with, and we're going to do this really quickly, the question of how Muslim women can develop a sense of ontological through this idea of Britishness. And when effectively they're silenced both through attempts to create ontological security through an idea of Britishness and through Muslim communities' attempts to create a sense of ontological security by attempting to vicariously identify with that sense of Britishness. Croft's work in this area, which I've reworked in the spirit of this panel, looks at the way Britishness contributes to the idea of ontological security, which necessitates the ontological insecuritization of others. In other words, if you're in the in-group of the British community, you need an other, an outsider. And it's this process of deciding who's in the outside group that we get to decide, say, who is and who isn't Britishness. In his book, Securitizing Islam, spoiler alert, he sets out that this process occurs through British Muslims and sets out a series of events in British history through which a sense of Britishness established. To sum it up quickly, I borrow his title, 2 World Wars and a World Cup, and how people identify with these. So I'm beginning with the school curriculum and trying to figure out how Muslim female students would vicariously identify with themselves or create their, how other students would identify with Muslim women, or how indeed they would see themselves in the curriculum. So one of the first places where we establish this sense of Britishness is within the school curriculum, where we learn Britain's history, literature, music. And it's only right here to acknowledge British brilliant work that students do, that our schools are doing to ensure that their students get a varied curriculum within the limitations of exam boards and resources. But resources are limited, and when there's a lack of, there is a lack of Muslim women represented in books that are available. Even within the wider press, when we see the Muslim schoolgirl, it will feature through coverage of cases where schoolgirls have taken their schools to court for the right to wear the niqab, or in the case of the Bethel schoolgirls, they're presented as an other, a threat to Britishness. One of the ways to, of course, to create the sense of Britishness is, as Crofter says, and I know Joe's work also looks at, is through the World Wars. And in an attempt to create a shared history in identifying themselves as British, Muslim groups such as the Muslim Council of Britain write of soldiers in the World War. We know that Commonwealth soldiers played a part, yet less attention is paid to people such as Noor Inayat Khan, pictured here, the Indian Muslim spy who was awarded a George Cross. A lot of Western media accounts of her downplay her religion. She's simply presented as an Indian princess who did brave things. Her religious identity is silenced, and within the telling of our war history, she's often a footnote. Here, a Muslim woman who goes against the grain of the way Muslim women are usually presented is silenced both by the history books and her own community, rather than placing a Muslim woman at the heart of one of the constructs of Britishness. Elite. So I have to give props to Saarah here, because this is a slide based on a conversation with her. And also I'm too old to have watched this show, because when we were trying to find an arena where the everyday Muslim is represented away from the cliches of terrorism, and I'm thinking if anybody's watched Jed Mercutio's Bodyguard, we thought of this arena, the TV program. I adopted with this the RIS test, which is named after the actor Riz Ahmed, who, by the way, even though he has his, the test isn't without his problems, and it has 5 rules. When you talk about Muslims, are they the victim or the perpetrator of terrorism? Are they presented as irrationally angry? Are they presented as superstitious, culturally backwards, or anti-modern? Are they presented as a threat of way to Western life? And if she's female, is she presented as being oppressed by her male counterparts? But even though the test is aimed at ensuring representation, one trope appears to have been swapped for another, and instead we are faced with the everyday hijaban, usually a fair-skinned Middle Eastern South Asian woman. This is problematic in a couple of ways. While the hijab is becoming more popular amongst Muslim women, the vast majority of Muslim women tend not to wear it. And this trope also plays into issues of both colorism and anti-Blackness within Muslim communities. One of the things that we also see is, again, through Muslim men, is that when actors such as Riz Ahmed appear in a love relationship, it tends to be with a white woman. So until the recent excellent Lady Parts on Channel 4, and if you haven't watched it, I do recommend you, Black female Muslims are also rarely represented on screen. So representation now comes in the trope of the Muslim woman showing she's ready to be a strong, independent woman by either removing her hijab for the love of a white man. In Elite, Saarah tells me, because I gave up after 1 episode, the intelligent Muslim hijab-wearing woman, student seen here, is threatened with expulsion if she wears a hijab. She gets around this by wearing it to and from at school, but not at school. Again, putting in this paradox that they're not always together, that hijab and school doesn't going. In season 2, she walks into a bar, suddenly not wearing her hijab, and begins to drink alcohol. And I'll quote Saarah here, gets with a white savior boy named Guzman, which basically shows she's free of her oppression and her hijab. The reason I'm quoting Saarah here is because Saarah is a Muslim schoolgirl, and actually this is how she sees it. But this trope isn't just for schoolgirls. Amongst female Muslim WhatsApp groups, there are threads of video clips of Muslim women in dramas showing their commitment to their job country by removing their hijab and their white male colleagues protecting her. In 9/11 Lone Star, when a Muslim firefighter loses hijab, her colleagues dramatically form a wall to show how supportive of her there. In Grey's Anatomy, bizarrely, a Muslim doctor uses her hijab to stop some bleeding and not the scores of medical supplies around her. So in trying to establish how we identify with Muslim women and how we vicariously, or how they can be vicariously identified with, I think my presentation tried to say we have to first establish Muslim women as part of the British story and move on from these tropes of representation. And I will leave it there and hand over to our next excellent panel member, Tonio.
Hi. Well, obviously, my name is Tonio, and I'm doing my presentation on what does independence and colonization mean to me as a descendant of Africa. So I want to make something clear in the beginning of my presentation that I want to make it, I don't want to spread awareness or inform you about what colonization and independence is and how it affects my identity. I wanted to almost open your mind to make you think almost, instead of me just like forcing information on you and you just taking it in. When I'm done, obviously, I'm gonna ask you a couple of questions and hopefully you'll be able to like find your own answers to them. So 3 questions I want you to keep in your head is, what does colonization mean to you? What does independence mean to you? And how do these two things, how have these two things influenced your identity? Obviously, you don't have to have an immediate answer to the questions. I just want you to keep that in your mind. And then later on in the presentation, you might have like a better answer to that question, or you go and search it out for yourself. My answer to those questions, at first, when I asked myself, what does independence mean to me? I literally just thought of, what's it called? Just gaining life, living life without my parents and like being free. That's what I originally thought independence was. When I asked myself, what does colonization mean to me? I just thought like my country, because I'm Kenyan, gaining independence from the UK, nothing special. And I didn't really have a clue, any clue what those two things influenced me. Like I had no thought, no nothing. When I searched what does independence, if I search what is independence in the internet, it says the fact or the state of independence. And if I search what does colonization, what's colonization on the internet, it's the action or the process of settling among an established control over the indigenous people of an area. The funny thing is, those were really vague responses. And I feel like with the internet, yes, it will always give you an answer, and that's true. And it's really nice. Obviously, the internet will give you an answer. It doesn't give you, I wouldn't give you the right answer though at the same time. It's not precise, it's not deep, and you won't really like find an understanding with yourself. And that was what my original presentation was about. However, I started interviewing people of my family, because I have like a WhatsApp group chat of a bunch of people from Africa with different backgrounds and different opinions on a lot of social things. So I interviewed them, asked the same 3 questions I asked you today, and this was the answers. So for what does colonization mean to them, one person gave me an answer. To me, colonization means that my ancestors did not have an opportunity to understand their own importance and values of the land and themselves. So the gates were opened for them to come over and take advantage of our land and surroundings had to offer, leading to them being looked down upon. Then another person said, colonization to me, a process by which certain countries, almost all European, conquered and processed to rule over the other countries. It was a kind of slavery at a site that made people their slaves without moving them from home, just to impose their rules, demanded their payments, and then proceeded to repeat them, to take the maximum economic gain at the absolute minimum input of concern of the people colonized. As you can see, just by me asking that question, they've given me like more of a definition. These were 2 different answers, and even though they were the same, they were completely different. And I feel like unless you go really, really deep into the internet, you're not going to find that, where it literally just took me less than 5 minutes to get these answers. Then with what does independence mean to my family? Independence is a process of removing ourselves from influence of the countries that colonized us. It's an ongoing process that could actually end. What happened with colonization will always have an effect on us for various reasons. And another one was, means that with the knowledge of the chance we currently have, we have a better chance to find our values worthiness of ourselves, and to be able to, whoever we change, to sit on the same table with men and discuss different issues without prejudice. Independence has allowed me to be a better way to educate all that every human being matters. And then my final question is, how has these two things influenced your identity? With the two, I am able to live in a foreign country with pride and be able to still talk about my culture and country with pride, and not have to look over my shoulder and worry about offending anyone, because equality, diversity is allowed. And then another one was a reason to do with the identity. You see, the name I used, the language I spoke, and the thought it is English is what I'm most comfortable in. The religion and closet to which is Christianity. Even my nationality, Kenya, is product of colonial imagination. That we've just continued with these two processes have almost completely shifted my identity. They are why I say I am Kenyan rather than that I am Suba, which is a place in Kenya. The form of independence that took place in Kenya with focus in the negative effects of tribal identity is seen as a path towards peace instead of a historical legacy of colonial rule. So yeah, after talking to my family and getting more of an understanding, clearly, as you can see, I asked myself the same questions again. So what does colonization mean to me? And when I ask myself that, colonization means that I have a great opportunities compared to people before me. I have family members like my grandma, who was literally 14 when Kenya got their independence. And obviously she had to fight for things, like she had to learn. Kenya was poor, basically, not even Kenya, the whole of Africa and other countries that were colonized were held back compared to others. And to see where they are now is really great, considering it took countries like, basically European countries, hundreds of years to get to where they are now, which only took less than 50. And then what does independence mean to me? Kind of similar to one of the answers there. I can literally go outside and I don't have to worry about offending someone or worried that I might have to walk on eggshells. I still obviously have to, because the world isn't perfect and we're in a transitional period. We still need to find our rhythm, our beat, to be more diverse, and equality still needs to improve. But I don't have to walk on eggshells compared to what I did in the 80s or the 90s or the 60s or the 70s. And how these two things influence my identity. I would say that these two things have influenced my identity more than I actually realized. I was born in this country, however, I say I'm Kenyan, obviously, because even though I am born in this country, I speak the language, I am still Kenyan. I'm descendant from Kenyan people. I can tell you that if I go to Kenya and someone asks me where am I from, I wouldn't say I'm from the UK or I'm British. I would say I'm Luo, which is a tribe in Kenya. These two things have influenced my identity more than I realized, to the point where I didn't even realize these things influence my identity. And so I just wanted my presentation just to like open your mind. Like I said before at the beginning, I do not want to push my ideas onto you. I just wanted you to see what these three questions mean to someone from an African descent, or specifically Kenya. If you want to look at like ways to like find out more stuff about Africa, I would suggest searching Independence Days. For example, you know about the 4th of July in America, that you see that everywhere. However, you don't hear about the 12th of December in Kenya, or the 1st of October in Nigeria, or the 21st of August in Ethiopia, the 31st of May in South Africa, or even the first country to even gain independence in 1957, I'm sure, is the 6th of March, which is Ghana. It's just Ghana. These countries have gained independence, and like I would say starting point to do your own research into it is just like seeing how they celebrate it. Even if it's just like putting it on your story, you're making people aware and you're opening people's minds. So at the beginning, I had the same questions. What does colonization mean to you? What does independence mean to you? And how have these two things influenced your identity? Yeah, that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Tonio. That was brilliant. Thank you. Okay, Alex and Mia, we're now on to you guys, and yeah, you're sharing your own screen, so we'll leave you to it.
Vicarious Identities in Literature by me, Alexandra Ignat.
And me, Mia Mattu.
Our chosen books are
The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood,
Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte,
and Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte.
Topics of discussion will include gender roles,
Conformity,
relationships with food,
personal growth,
morality,
the racial other,
and of course, vicarious identity. Today, we will be presenting to you our take on the literature trope of vicarious identity, aka living through another. This trope is also paralleled in our everyday lives, whether that's via the media we consume to simply spotting patterns in the clouds. We see it everywhere. Every time we hear a story, our subconsciousness is already attaching itself to the protagonist in order to better understand and emphasize with the topic. We will be exploring this idea within gender bias, then within racial bias, and then a combination of the two, as by no means do they exist alone. Even now, as we present the slideshow, you will probably at some point vicariously identify with any of the characters mentioned, whether these are struggles you have faced personally or struggles that you are trying to understand in this way. Here, we will meet you in the middle by bringing vicarious identity to you through a combination of analysis and poetry crafted by yours truly. So take a seat and enjoy this journey without movement, for that's what vicarious identity is all about.
So, what is vicarious identity? Vicarious derives from the Latin word vicarius, which means to substitute, conveying the meaning of experiencing in the imagination through the feelings and actions of another person. While identity derives from the Latin word idem, translating to same, and it means the characteristics defining who or what a person or a thing is. When you put these together, vicarious identity, known as living through another, can be recognized as a social psychological concept derived from a lack of self-fulfillment and insecurity. It refers to the process in which a person gains a sense of self-identity, self-esteem, and purpose by appropriating the experiences and achievements of others.
You may ask yourself, what is an everyday example of vicarious identity? An everyday example of it is patriotism. Patriotism refers to the notion in which a person possesses the quality of being patriotic and shows devotion and vigorous support for one's country. This attachment is deeply rooted within our everyday lives and identities, since it encompasses a combination of different feelings related to one's country of origin, not excluding ethnic, cultural, political, or historical aspects. Although patriotism is often associated with positive connotations, sadly, it can frequently be expressed vicariously through extremism, such as when a person takes excessive pride in a country's merits and achievements or feels shame for the country's crimes, to the point where it crosses the barrier towards xenophobia and the person converts from the simple feeling of pride to a sense of self-superiority. Next slide, please.
Here is history, rewritten. Here is black paint thrown over the white walls. Here are the people who fought and the people who nurtured, so we could have the option to do both. Here are the people who were silent and those who were silenced. Here are the people who made history and never lived to find out. Here are their pages, whited out. Here are the people who never existed.
Vicarious identities in literature. Although it is not a foreign concept in literature, to some it may not be as noticeable. Classic novels, for example, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which portrays the Roma people as the racial other, comprise this concept. Historically, if there would be one word to describe the Roma people, that would be persecution. Although often labeled as criminals, they are more likely to be victims of crime. Roma people have faced centuries of stigmatization, ostracization, and marginalization in Europe, and were forced to endure a lack of cultural understanding and prejudice. Even in a modern society where discrimination seems to be mostly unacceptable, Roma people are obliged to still face problems such as these.
You sit in front of one such person and listen to her story. Here is an invisible woman, an edible woman. Here is a woman told to stay thin, stay pretty, so she eats their words for a meal. Here is a woman told she is a monster and only tries to be a better monster than the rest. Here is a woman who lost herself. She couldn't recognize her reflection if she tried. Here is a woman who looks at her hands, but they are not hers. She looks at her hands, but they are not hands. A woman leaves, eaten alive into nothing, and with the possibility to become everything.
Feminism, order, and eating disorders. If I were to introduce these topics to you without context, what would be your first ideas? It is likely you may affiliate them with modern movements, may even regard them as modern issues. Well, these were the topics discussed in proto-feminist work known as The Edible Woman, written approximately 50 years ago by Margaret Atwood. These were chosen not as a prediction of the future, but as an observation by Atwood of the current predicament and stigma surrounding them, and this book being the groundbreaking artwork that dared to dive headfirst and expose it for its realities, how human it is to be able to envy and resent the same thing, and how environment shapes our internal biases, and how we have to actively unlearn it, how some people never do.
All this is reflected in the book's protagonist, Marianne. Marianne's conformist view on the world is turned upside down when she herself receives a hasty proposal that she is expected to accept, although she cannot bring herself to such a life laid out for her out of convenience. A battle of brain and heart commences, and we see her lose herself as the story switches from a first-person narrative to a third person.
And she is subjected to become a passive onlooker for her own life, a shadow of her former self. She tries to look for herself in food, and it disallows her to eat, won't let her stay alive. She becomes sickly within her metaphorical cannibalism and wastes away to her expectations. The story concludes with a return to first person as she seizes control over her life and learns more about herself as a person, what she wants and what she deserves. She builds her own vicarious identity by living through what she eats and allows what she should consume to instead consume her momentarily. Outside influences by other characters are also significant with their own ideologies. We are encouraged to identify the flaws in each of their ideologies and their strengths, learning, like Marian, how to craft our own inspired by Ainsley's self-sustenance to Clara's passiveness to Peter's entitlement. These outside influences are not only there to influence Marian's character development, but also our own as people oblige us not to idolize one, but instead take a deep look inside our own ideas, our own morality, and to seize our own individuality. Next slide.
Here is a man vulnerable before you, a man villainized and ruined and stronger for it. Here is a man who came from nothing and became only slightly more. Here is a man who is everything and never was anything. Here is a man who was powerful, but we've met enough knights in shining armor. Here is a new type of hero, one never heroic enough. Here is a knight in a tin suit, the only knight with battle scars to prove. Here is a man with nothing to lose and everything to gain.
Vicarious Identities in Literature, Wuthering Heights. As the critic Peter L. Thorslev argues, the Byronic hero is one of the most prominent literary character types of the Romantic period. One very important instance of this influence can be found in Wuthering Heights, and that is the character of Heathcliff. Wuthering Heights follows the life of this bewildering Roma-resembling person from the frail age of 7 up until the moment he dies in his late 30s. Heathcliff is raised by his adoptive family, only to be later on reduced to the status of servant and run away when the woman he loves marries another man. Due to his gypsy origin and his dark skin, he is ostracized by Victorian society. Nevertheless, in a dramatic, ironical turn of events, the roles reverse and he manages to gain enough wealth to prove his worth and superiority to the very British aristocracy who ostracized him. However, one can also argue that he is driven by an innate yearning to strive for an ideal which he fails to attain, and that triggers his obsession for vengeance. His portrayal as the antagonist not only highlights key Victorian anxieties regarding their supposedly morally supreme status, decreasing and colonial decline, but also critiques and accentuates the British Empire's deterioration as he represents what is seen as the racial other and is placed in a position of greater wealth and status later on in the novel, hence the anxiety revolving around those topics. Although it has been 175 years in which society has faced immense evolution since this novel was written, as mentioned before, Romani people still face exclusion from society and prejudice.
Next slide, please. Here is a new woman to take his place, her smile like a mad woman, never listened to before. Here is a woman torn from her motherland and labelled hysterical within her mourning. Here is a woman lucky to be married, even if that means she's thrown in the attic. Here is a woman, mad, senile and aggressive, more animal than person, more beast than beauty. Here is a woman closed off from the world. No one likes a mad woman. Here is a woman who is a ghost, a strange noise in the night, an old wives' tale. Here is a woman who is no longer here, a woman who never was.
As we have mentioned before, a trope maintained in classical literature through the representation of the Creole culture is the concept of the racial other. A book book in which this theory can be found is Charlotte Bronte's novel Jane Eyre. The novel follows the story of Jane Eyre as she battles with life struggles. Although her ethnicity is a source of mystery, some people argue that she is a Creole woman. And this character has been antagonized and prejudiced against. Despite having an incredibly significant role within the story's plot, Bertha Mason, Rochester's first wife, who is often described as violently insane and is confined to the attic, is solely presented through the eyes of Rochester and Jane, providing her with no voice of her own. Even when she does make an appearance, she is only limited to a few pages, and in those pages she is depicted through gothic imagery such as vampires or goblins, and that is strictly utilized and exploited to dehumanize her persona and bias the reader against her. Bronte's portrayal of Bertha as insignificant is a representative of the 19th century attitudes towards mental illnesses, the racial other, and society's ideas of what a woman should be.
Can we turn off the PowerPoint, please? So there we have it. Vicarious identity in only some of its many forms. Vicarious identity as a blessing or a curse, our salvation or our damnation. Vicarious identity in race, gender or mentality. Vicarious identity in our daily lives. Thank you for listening to our presentation. We will now be taking questions.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you for that amazing spoken word. And to quote them, yes, it is now open to questions. So if anybody does have any questions, I know, Tonio, you said you'd be happy to answer the question form to respond to Julia Welland's question, which on the reflections. So would you like to start us off by doing that?
Yeah, wait, what was the question exactly?
So Julia gave you a response, and I know you said that you wanted to just respond back to Julia's response.
Shahnaz, do you just want to read out the question?
Yeah.
Just for the other.
So Julia's put such tough questions to make us think about my own reflections on what colonization means to me as a white British woman. It's something I benefit from every day. And what independence means, do you know what? I've never thought about it until today, which I think says as much as it doesn't. Do you want to, or do you want time?
No, it's fine. I feel like with those questions, those questions are very out there at the same time. And no one has the same answer, because as she literally just said, she's a white British woman and I'm a black British / African male, and everyone's got a different identity and like have a different background, a different descendants. So that question is very, how can I say, it's gonna mean something different to everyone. I hope I made that clear in my presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, Tonio. Alex Amir, a question for you. Another great presentation. Thank you so much. My question is about the classic text you chose. As you note, some of these are over 100 years old. I wonder what they can tell us about contemporary society, particularly around gendered and racialized norms.
So even though these texts are like quite old, we can still identify with them today because they still bring up struggles that are prevalent in our day-to-day lives. And even the struggles that they talk about, like race and gender, they still haven't been completely eradicated in our day-to-day society. And that's evident through like a lot of things, job interviews, social movements, and basically anything can be linked back to these sort of roots. So I think that they still have a meaning in today's society, even if that meaning can be adapted and shaped into many new forms.
Brilliant, thank you. And you've also been asked, have you both read Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys?
No.
No.
Although it is on my reading list.
Brilliant. So we've got a question for all of you incredible students on the panel from Helen. So thank you all so much for your incredible presentations. They've all given me so much to think about. I would be interested to hear about what changes you would like to see in the school curriculum, and what can those of us working in higher education do to support students and facilitate change. So if anybody wants to go first, what do you want to see changed in the school curriculum in this field? Tonio, you're on mute.
I would say just like more of I would just say like have more lessons where like you speak on it, and like make it not awkward, because I feel like when you're teaching it it's a really awkward and tough subject, and some teachers feel like really uncomfortable with speaking it at the same time. So I feel like if we have more lessons where we speak it, whether it's literally just like, because obviously we have Black History Month in the UK, which is in October, I'm pretty sure. Sometimes I get mixed up with America and the UK's one. And I feel like we should have more lessons, whether it's literally just one lesson a week where we just teach it, or make it more, make it more like relevant and comfortable for the student and the teacher at the same time. Because I know it's a difficult subject to teach. Like I can see it with teachers, and like they really feel uncomfortable with it because it's tough to speak on. If that helps.
Brilliant, thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to respond to that? Saarah?
Okay, so with mine, I feel like if you're going to teach it, I don't want it to sort of be like this very weird atmosphere. Try and do it as naturally as you can, because a lot of students who we don't want to feel like, oh, like the teachers are now teaching about this issue and it's all like a burden, and like try and make it more natural. And also, like, you know, some of the books that we read, they're very like sort of from like it would be nice to learn books that are of like a wider range of different sort of ethnicities and different authors, just so that we can get like more understanding of the world. Because if we're only reading material from like white British people, or just like white, like we're not really getting a very wide sort of reading list. And also another one is, when we're reading books that have certain racial slurs in them, we don't need to say that slur out loud. Like a lot of like in my school, like the teacher would be like, it's fine, I'm going to say this word and it's in the book and I have to say it because it's in the book, so please don't be offended. But I'm like, but do you really need to say like, I think the students can read the book and see what's there, and the fact that you're acknowledging that it's bad, you really do not need to say these slurs. And also another thing is, there's not a lot of education on why slurs are bad. Like a lot of people call me like well, not a lot of people, but during my time as a student, I've been called like Paki and stuff, and people genuinely think that it's a shortened version of Pakistani, even though I'm Indian, so that makes no sense. And it really isn't, because there's a whole history behind it where like South Asians were dragged out of their houses and beaten and stuff, and not many people know about that. Like I learned about that a couple months ago. So I feel like if people become more aware of why saying slurs is wrong, and also when reading a book you don't need to say the slur, you can just like be aware that it's wrong. I feel like if it would be really nice to just make sure students are aware of that, so in the future they don't feel like, oh, it's fine because like if I can read it in a book because it's part of a context, it's fine. So when I'm singing a song, it should be fine as well. Like it has like a wider sort of impact. So yeah, that's kind of what my point is. question.
Thanks, Saarah. Alex Mead, yep.
I think I'd like to see more of an education on minority studies, but also like not as an outside thing. I'd like those minorities to be included in those studies for a first-person perspective, because otherwise it's seen as something to like oogle at, like you'd find in a museum or something that's not actually directly within the classroom. And very similar to what Sarah said, I'd like it to be taught like the tolerance, the religions, like it's Pride Month now. So I feel like there should be lessons covering the struggles there. There should be lessons covering the struggles of POC, of like, and people should be included within those discussions, because most of my education about these topics has actually been from online, which it's great to see that we're at a point that online can offer so much research and like spreading of information, but it should also be included in curriculum because not everyone will have access to these.
Brilliant. Okay, Amal, sorry, I seen you've got your hand up for a question. Thank you.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Thank you guys so much for an amazing presentation. As a person of color who came from my own widening participation background in Canada, I lived in the middle of nowhere in a completely white space, who did anti-racism after school programs to get education about my own culture and my own religion, being Black and Muslim, a fun quality to have during these times. I just wanted to ask you, in relation to the research that the lovely Shahnaz has exposed you to, and just events like these, how in the general political climate that you can see today in Britain versus the reading that you're being exposed to and the politics that you're now being engaged in, how has this encouraged you to want to or not want to be involved in academia or international politics? If anyone felt comfortable speaking to that, I would love to know.
Tonio. Oh, and Mia. Should we go Tonio, Mia, then Saarah? Okay, yeah.
I would just say that it is, that's a difficult question. There's a lot to handle, but yeah, I would say when it comes to like very like politics, is you don't really see it as much as you want to see it when it comes to politics. However, though, like it's starting to come, it's starting to build up, and like you see people like Obama really as like a face of someone being of color and being at a really high level of power. It helps to inspire, because I feel like I would say I idolize him a little bit, to be fair, and helped inspire me to do research, and obviously the team that have helped me with this as well. They inspired me a lot to do my research and ask these questions and everything. So yeah, that's the best way I could possibly answer it.
Thank you. Mia.
Well, I think presentations like these really open your eyes up to like the benefits and the sort of hindrances of like these issues within academia, and I feel like I'd quite like to go into it to change it, but also sometimes it seems overwhelming, like the challenge. But I think it's something to embrace and like hopefully one day eradicate by a little step at a time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Saarah.
That is a very difficult question. I'll try and answer it as honestly and as best as I can. I think schools are always very pressured when talking about politics, not to influence the students' sort of like point of view and stuff like that. But also, I kind of think that once students leave school, they don't really have that much knowledge about politics or something, and then when they're forced to like look at it. They're like going online and like being fed all this information which might like hinder their decisions. So it would be nice to kind of have a bit more education on some of that subject. I'm trying to think of something to say, but I think representation in politics, as Tonio said, is very important. For me, I can't really think of many from the top of my head, but I feel like I'd like to see more, definitely, like around the world. And I feel like with the growing use of technology and how communication is more actively used now, we can use our voices to more easily share our thoughts, and hopefully one day that will bring us to a point where we're all communicating really well, so we're not offending anyone, and it will be more easier to gain a better understanding. But yeah, it's a very difficult question. I hope I've answered it somewhat.
Thank you. And I'm going to end the questions with a question from Ben Richardson, who we've got to give a shout out because this journey started thinking about these ideas with a talk that he did. Ben said, thank you so much for your amazing talks. Can I ask how you want to develop your ideas going forward? Are there any other topics or questions you want to think about? And you can respond to me and I can forward it on if you do need time to take that question.
I would just say if I had anything like to improve or like to research more on, would just be like how to make more of a change. I mean, like at the end of my presentation, I did get into like celebrating Independence Days, but like I feel like I can do so much more, and we can all do so much more to celebrate, whether it's people of color or whether it's what your gender is or your sexuality. I feel like we need to try and find a way to expand equality and diversity as a whole in general. So yeah, I would just, for me, as an improvement of my presentation, would just be like how to push equality.
Thank you. That's a perfect answer, Tonio. Okay. Joe, did you want to say something to perhaps wrap up the panel? Because I'm aware we've only got 4 minutes.
Yeah, I appear not to be able to start my video. Oh, the host has asked me to start my video, so I shall. There we go. Yeah, I've been nodding wildly with all of with everything that everyone's been saying, I just want to begin by thanking all the panelists for their fabulous presentations, because it's been honestly, and I know I'm biased, but it has been one of the most enjoyable panels that I've ever been on in academia. It's just been so rich, and I just feel so privileged to have to have been able to kind of share in all these insights with you. It's been great. I had if I may, I've only got 3 minutes left, but I did have a question that I wanted to address to Saarah and Lily-Mae about their presentation, which I thought was really fascinating, about the this kind of appropriation of for example, BTS and music by people of color in order to kind of brand the industry as a whole. So of course the thing you were focusing on there was kind of race, but I was wondering, and it's completely fine if you don't have a definite answer about it at all, but I was kind of wondering how you felt gender featured in there. So do you think that there's a particular problem with recognizing the achievements of female people of color as opposed to men, or do you think this is a problem that just goes across both genders and none? So that I'd just like to ask that first of all.
Thank you for your question, first of all. I think gender has a role, definitely, because there is a growing amount of not just like POC that like with white women as well, like Taylor Swift, for example, was like the first female artist to, I can't remember what quite it was off the top of my head, but she received multiple awards. I think definitely in like the entertainment industry there was quite a gap, and thankfully from what I'm seeing it's progressing to a point where maybe it can get better in the future. We don't know for certain, but hope it looks like it's going that way. And with female POC artists, I'm trying to think. I feel like they're being appreciated in society, like sort of, because there are a lot of upcoming artists who are like of different like ethnicities, so like and they are definitely being like listened to and like, you know, like in society. But I feel like when it comes to actually awarding and giving those like official sort of achievements, they probably aren't being awarded. And I feel like it starts with sort of like, I don't know how to put this. I feel like we're getting to a point where hopefully they're gonna get there, but it's still very uncertain how long that might take for them to get there. And hopefully that can happen a lot faster. But yeah, I'm kind of trying to think.
That's okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Red. That was a brilliant answer and question, and brilliant answer to give us a bit of hope as we finish this panel. Just to say huge thanks, massive thanks to BISA for allowing this. I know the students have enjoyed it. I've learned so much. And it's just been an absolute privilege to be on the same panel as you guys. So thank you. And with that note, I will say thank you so much. Thank you.